This is Tom Thorpe, lead designer for our Windows Phone 7 geocaching application. So why couldn't we just port the iPhone design?
A lot of reasons. One was we had a beautiful set of guidelines from Microsoft. It's the Metro theme that they put out. And the iPhone just doesn't match that theme. It doesn't look like it. It's, buttons are everywhere. It can be a little bit confusing. The guidelines were so nice because they're laying out this very clear, very simple design that was very intuitive and very easy for folks to use. So using those designs, we actually recreated the look and feel of a mobile application to not only adhere to those guidelines, but provide a better experience to our users. Ramping up on Metro was actually fairly easy. The hard part was translating our brand into Metro and making it flow. The sort of simplistic, beautiful, kind of easy to use, easy to navigate design made that very possible. We could sit down, we could say, these are the major features, this is how a user is going to navigate to those features. Our brand on the web and in other platforms may not have been that easy and doesn't necessarily look that well.
Yeah. Well, I remember our first couple of versions were all black and white with square buttons, and we were following Metro like to the letter. Basically making them. We didn't know at the time because we didn't have a device, but basically making our app look like a system app. And we saw a couple of demos. One of them was a Netflix. I can't remember the other one. Travelocity. And when we saw those demos, we realized that we were adhering a little too tightly to the guidelines. Once that happened, we went back to the drawing board and started working on the version that we have now. Plus, we were building this before the release, the RTM controls were out.
Right.
So we had no pano, we had no pivot, and we were kind of like, put pivot here, put pano here. So once those shipped, the doors opened for us a little bit, and then once we saw kind of the amount of design freedom that other people had, we were both blown away when we saw those two demos, and each separately had the same thought of, we need to go back and really make this thing.
Well, to be honest, I don't regret having done the black and white to begin with.
Oh, no.
I actually think that was probably the best learning experience that we could have had.
Yeah, and things like the pano, pivot, allowed for that really nice graphic in the background, that kind of stuff that we really didn't have on our other platforms.
Well, the nice thing about it is the graphic that we're using on the background is a direct tie-in to our website. We actually use that on the bottom and the footer on our website. So to be able to look at this and see it across the panorama and the pivot control is great. It's a great tie-in for our users. It really kind of helps to reinforce our branding. Following the guidelines so strictly actually gave us more of an understanding when it came time to do the real full-blown creative. I think we actually had a very good understanding at that point of what we were working with and how we could tweak it to kind of bring in elements of our brand but still keep within the guidelines.
Yeah, and as we were ramping up, keeping it simple definitely helped with the learning curve, at least on my end.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And the other thing I want to follow up on is seeing some of the other demos really was very eye-opening.
Yeah.
To look at things like Travelocity and Netflix and to see these really cool backgrounds and just sort of the slick interface, I think was really inspiring and really kind of helped us to sit there and say, hey, listen, we have a lot of freedom here. What can we do? Yeah. And I think that's when both you and I started really kind of going with the creative. And it's like, okay, we can do this here and we can put this here. And
yeah, all of a sudden it became, instead of pushing and pushing and pushing, it became like reining ourselves in, actually.
Right.
Mostly just from time constraints, really, because we wanted to ship it someday. So, yeah, I don't regret that either.
We really we really didn't focus too much on the other platforms. Yes, we wanted to look at feature parity. We wanted to make sure that if a user had an iPhone or an Android and they saw a certain feature set, that they would also be able to see that on Windows Phone 7. However, we kind of threw out the design. We knew that we had the Metro guidelines, and we knew that we were going to be creating a product that was very slick. It was very simple, very easy to use. And I think because of that, it gave us some more creative freedom. So we kind of, at numerous points, put away the other phones and said, okay, they are what they are, but let's really focus on a new user experience, a better user experience.
I found that to be really cool, by the way. It was like having a clean slate. I mean,
Yeah.
we could kind of take the best ideas from the old things, but integrate them into, like, something that we could come up with that, is brand new.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
And I personally like that freedom to kind of sit and create from scratch, and not have to worry about porting over correct graphics and putting them in the correct spot.
Sure.
We kind of got that fresh start, which
Yeah.
is really great. And I actually personally feel that this is the best looking of the apps because of that.
I'm biased.
Yeah, I am too.
The way that we interacted was, I would kind of code up a feature. It would look like crap developer art, and I could turn it over to Tom, and Tom would go and actually work the XAML for me from Blend, and just check it in, and we could test it from there. It was really cool to have something that you don't necessarily need to be like a hardcore developer to be able to integrate even functional design ideas.
Well, I think from my perspective, you and I did a great job of sort of collaborative and iterative design and development. And I think that the combination of Visual Studio and Blend really helped us out quite a bit.
Yeah.
I know it's not uncommon in most places to kind of do the back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes that back and forth can be a little bit difficult. But with these two tools and the way they integrated so well, I actually think you and I were coding and designing at a faster pace than in most other situations.
Yeah, and there were times, it wasn't always in silos. I mean, there were times when I'd have you come over because I only needed a tweak here or there, just get your opinion on that. And you were checking something in, there was some code error or something, I'd come over and just type a few things, and that was it. It was pretty seamless integration, I thought.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, especially compared to some previous experience, although I didn't have access to Tom, so could have very well been, that he's just that awesome of a designer. Yeah, when building our iPhone app, it really was kind of we would do these things in series. It would be, first the dev work gets done, then the design work gets done, and hopefully no more dev work got done after that, or bug fixes that affected the design, because then we'd have to go through that whole process again. But standing this up together, and I even went so far as to go over and start sitting closer to where you sit so that we could work back and forth, because we were on a deadline.
Yeah.
I think that was very helpful. So it started out as a project in a fantasy sprint, actually. Fantasy sprint was, we follow Scrum and Agile, and a fantasy sprint was kind of our reward for a job well done. We all got to pick something that we wanted to do. And I chose the Windows Phone 7 app, and in, about 3 weeks had something that was a real primitive version of what we ended up with, just from the public tools that were available online at the time, and kind of working in a bubble. And then after that fantasy sprint, it was kind of approved, I guess is the right word. But people thought that this would be a good idea to continue with. So the cool thing is that we didn't have to scrap it. It wasn't a prototype. It was built using some sound principles, and we were able to iterate from there. So that was kind of version 1. I'd say it went through 4 major revisions on the way to our first version. Each one kind of taking a small step back, not having never once was there that rewrite, which was really cool.
Sure.
That was a great part of
Yeah.
this thing, and it's why it's half the reason we were able to spin it up so fast is that we never had to go back and do a massive refactor that started us over.
True.
Yeah, and at that point, after the fantasy sprint, you came on. I got API support, kind of full time, and we had the test reserved.
Right.
And so it's kind of a skeleton crew, but
And how many weeks did it take? I don't actually remember.
about 2 months, I think. Right about 2 months. Yeah. Also, we were working strictly on the emulator we were working strictly on the emulator for a while. We finally got a developer device, and the first thing it did was crash because we were using the pre-RTM version of the Bing Maps tool, plugin rather, the DLL, and so I was all excited to see it on the device. We load it up on the device, it just goes right back to the start screen. But after a couple of actually relatively minor fixes, it was up and running on the device, and we were out finding a cache probably within a day or two of getting the actual device.
Yeah.
So in terms of using the tools, I think we both hit the same learning curve and ended up going in very different ways, right? You ended up, in the end, doing almost everything in Blend and pulling into Visual Studio, whereas I kind of picked apart what Blend had made and started coding up the XAML. So I think that's probably just developer/designer difference. But what did you like about Blend?
I thought Blend was a great product. It really allowed me to get in and just play with the design and not ever have to worry about the code.
Sure.
I'm a very visual person, so if I look at this page and there are buttons and text boxes and things, I want to know how they're laid out. I want to make sure that they're spaced appropriately, and the flow on the page is very readable and very easy to see. And Blend was a great tool to use. It allowed me to drag and drop things around, to position things exactly where I wanted them. When I wanted to do more fine-tuning, I could actually get into the XAML and start playing around with that a little bit. But if I didn't want to, I didn't have to.
Sure.
So it made my life much easier. I got that great visual experience.
Yeah. For me, iPhone platform has the interface builder tool, and you get a lot of that kind of drag and drop from that as well. But what I didn't get from that I got in the XAML was the ability to look at the XAML that was created by that visual tool and kind of tweak it here and there, and I found that really helpful.
Yeah. A couple of other things I really liked about Blend was it was very easy working with graphics.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were importing images, I got to see them. I got to see right where they were going. I got to understand where the images were being placed in relation to things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in other development tools, that's not so easy.
Sure.
And you don't really get a sense for where things are going if you actually get into the emulator and start playing around and looking at it. And here we got a very nice preview of things to come. We could play around with it a little bit. Of course, take a look at the emulator to see how things work, but
Sure.
Really cut down a lot of that back and forth.
Yeah. Speaking of dealing with graphics, we ended up hitting an issue that probably a lot of people are going to hit with the GIFs. The GIF support. Our website used a lot of GIFs, and we wanted to reuse a lot of our iconography in the app, and we ended up, I thought it was going to be this massive thing, but you seemed to turn it around pretty quickly, just creating PNGs out of the GIFs. Plus,
Photoshop
again, there
has
was...
its uses.
Yeah. I think that was our biggest stumbling point in the first week or so. That was our first panic point anyway. But, like I said, you got them out pretty quick. Didn't seem like... Maybe you were just doing a ton of work and not showing it. But
Yeah,
didn't seem like it was all that hard. Yeah.